Well, good evening and welcome to the live stream event on the 17th of May 2021. Martin North from Digital Finance Analytics here. Great to have you on the show tonight. And just before we get going, I will just remind you, as always, that we don't give financial or legal advice on the channel. We do moderate the stream. This is as at the 17th of May. And if you would like to ask a question, feel free. Just use @WalkTheWorld to make sure that it gets my attention. I've also enabled Super Chat, which means that you can get your question top of the queue or indeed make a contribution to what we do here. That would be greatly appreciated. Anyway, without further ado, let me bring Steve in first. Hi, Steve. How are you going?
Very well. It's just gone 2 minutes past 5 in the morning over here, and I've been up for 2 hours. So I'm in Austin, Texas, and I'm suffering from jet lag and thoroughly enjoying it.
Well, it's glad to have you on, and nice surprise. Thank you very much. And Victor, you there as well?
I am, yes.
Excellent. Hello. Well, thanks very much for coming on. And boy, there's so much to talk about in the last week. But can we just immediately go into this question of how the voting system works, right? Because Steve touched on it in the Senate last time. But Victor, can we start with the lower house, right? And of course, you're in North Sydney, so there are some interesting local shenanigans going on there. But the point is, a lot of people really don't quite understand how the voting system actually works. So I think this is a good opportunity just to explain a little bit more about it.
Well, I'll try and explain it and at the same time illustrate it by what's happening in North Sydney. And I'll try and not be too technical. But so I guess you need to know that the original purpose of the preferential system and the continued purpose, although people don't really think about it, particularly in a two-party system, is not to give necessarily the majority or the plurality their first choice, but to leave the least number of people dissatisfied. In other words, you might have a candidate that scores relatively low, but ends up winning the election. But there are a large number of people who, whilst that candidate wasn't their first choice, are reasonably content because, let's say, it's their second choice or maybe their third choice out of, like we have in North Sydney at the moment, 10 candidates. Now, having said that, the way the system works is you get what's called the primary vote. So you count everybody's number one, where they got number one. That gives them their primary vote. And then you rank them from 1 to 10. And the candidate who comes 10th, they are eliminated, first of all, and their second preference goes to whoever they gave their second preference to, and that adds to their votes. Then you eliminate number 9 and number 8 and so on. Now, in North Sydney, we've got this fascinating situation where you had what was, an ultra-safe Liberal seat where the Liberal candidate would win without the need to go to preferences. He'd get 53 or 54% of the vote. That's Trent Zimmerman, the incumbent. Now, depending on the polls you look at, and some of them are very dodgy and some of them are more appropriate and accurate, but in all probability, Zimmerman will be down to not much more than 30%, or let's say 35% if he does really well. Now, he's under challenge from a very well-funded Homes of Court independent, a highly qualified Labor candidate, and hopefully myself. Now, let me postulate a situation, and this could, I'm not saying this is going to happen, but this could happen. My feeling at the moment is that Zimmerman will get 30-something come first. The independent will get something over 20, 22, 23 come second. The Labor candidate will get around 20 or just under 20 come third. I will come fourth with about 13, 14, 15% of the vote, something like that. The Greens will not do well for a bunch of reasons that we don't need to discuss now. But we'll get about 10%, and then that leaves 7 or 8% for Palmer, One Nation, and a whole bunch of other parties. Now, for various reasons, which I also won't go into because it would take too long, I've been lucky enough to have the benefit of the preferencing of not only Labor and Liberal, but Palmer United and the Liberal Democrats. And this is due to central casting and has nothing to do with me or the local candidate or anything else. So here's the scenario. I could come forth with, say, 14% of the vote. I would get, and let's say the Greens come fifth. Now, the Greens have actually preferenced the independent, but statistics tell us that very little more than 10% of Greens voters vote according to the recommended preference. The upshot is that a lot of them will vote for me, and they've said that. So I think the Palmer United, the Liberal Democrats and the Greens preferences could get me over Labor and put me in third place. And because I've got the Labor preferences, they could get me over the independent and put me in second place. And then it would be between Zimmerman and myself and would depend on the preferences of the independent. She doesn't actually recommend preferences, so we don't know how that would go, but there's every possibility that I would get a sufficient number to put me over Zimmerman and win the seat with 14% of the vote. And that is exactly the way in a big field where there's a lot of close competition. That's what the preferential system was designed to do, to disappoint the least number of people, because, okay, I only had 14% who want me as their first preference, but something like 40-something% who want me as their second. Now, but I'm absolutely sure if that did happen, that there would be an outcry that the system had failed us because somebody with 14% of the primary vote had won the seat. So you can see that it's kind of a unique and fascinating situation that comes about because the two-party system is no longer all there is. In many seats, and North Sydney is one of them, there's at least one other real feasible candidate, and sometimes two and three. So all before us. I hope that made some sense anyway.
Yeah. But the question then, Victor, is, so if you were voting in North Sydney, right, it's very important to go through the sequence and put the right numbers down, right? Not just throw a one at something, right?
Oh, yeah. You throw a one at something, then it's an informal vote. Doesn't count. You have to number every... And we have this funny situation that the independent doesn't recommend, because how to vote cards are just recommendations, of course. Yeah. People are entitled to preference as they see fit.
Yes.
But the independent doesn't even recommend them. They say, well, I'm an independent, I'm not going to recommend anybody. So what they do is they put one against the independent's name and then question marks in all the other boxes. And it's quite comical on the booth that the poor old volunteers for the independent have to say to every punter that comes through, please number every box. The question marks don't mean you have to put a question mark there. But of course, people will. There will be people who will put one or more question marks in the other boxes and render the thing invalid.
Yeah, absolutely. So, and that's really important. And again, Steve sort of touched on this, and I had quite a few people afterwards say, "Oh, didn't know that." So the level of understanding as to how to vote effectively is a bit of a worry, really.
Well, that's right, and I think that I think one thing that people really need to bed down in their mind is that if, say, for example, you are very keen that the Liberal incumbent is not re-elected, the only way you can be absolutely sure that one way or another your preference won't flow to that incumbent is to preference them last. And I think people don't understand that. They think, well, if I want to vote for Vic or I want to vote for the independent or whoever, and I put them one, and that's my protest, and I put the Liberal candidate second, I've done my duty. But Vic or the independent's preferences could flow to the Liberal under those circumstances, as I've illustrated with the kind of complications that can ensue with a big field.
Absolutely.
So if you don't want Liberal to be elected, the only way to be certain is put them last.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's actually, if I can intervene there, that's actually a neat suggestion for people who are confused. What you really have to do to use the thing intelligently is write down your first and your last preferences. initially. They put, what's they put one next to Victor and 11 against Zimmerman.
Yeah.
Okay. And then you can fill in the other numbers as you like. But you have to fill every last box. Every last box has to be numbered. And then if you do that, what you're saying is I would like to see Victor get in, okay, but I definitely don't want the Liberal Party. So 1 and 11, and then you go to, 2 to 10 for the remaining ones. And you should think seriously about who's the person I next prefer after Victor. Okay. Now, what scares us, this is what scares us, in the sense of the party and the tactics of the independents in general, the ones the Home Court has funded, is also don't give preferences. Now, it's quite possible, I'm thinking of my dear departed mother here, a rusted-on Liberal Party voter who, on a couple of occasions in life, voted Labor because she was disgusted with John Howard over Chiltern Overboard and the war in Iraq. Okay, so she voted then. And it took ages for me to convince her, both logically and emotionally, that she had to put the Liberal Party last on the preferences. What she was going to do is put Labor 1 and Liberal 2. Now, if she's in a seat where there's a majority of Liberal voters, then the Labor would have been knocked out and her vote would have gone to the Liberal Party, which is what she was trying to prevent. Yeah. So she said, I don't think I actually told her that, but they would have said, put one, if there's 4 candidates, put 4 for Liberal. And then you've got to put Labor above Liberal if you want the vote to go to Labor.
Yeah. And Steve, your mother is the classic example of the person that the independents, the Home Court funded independents are playing to, because they want obviously to get the first vote themselves, but number 2, they're happy for the person to misunderstand the preferential system and have the second vote go to the Liberal incumbent, because they don't want to alienate that person by suggesting what you suggested to your mother, because you can sit your mother down in a familial situation and make it very clear in a dispassionate sort of loving way. But if that's on a how to vote card, they go, well, what are they trying to do? I mean, the Liberals aren't that bad. I'm upset with them, but they're not that bad. I'm not putting them below Labor. And they don't want to create that. And that's the real reason that they don't issue preferences. They do not want to alienate people. The upshot is that if that process goes ahead, it's complicated in North Sydney because there are other contenders. But if that process goes ahead, as it did with Zali Steggall and Tony Abbott, for example, you get a situation where the independent will be elected, or if the independent isn't elected, the Liberal incumbent will be returned. Sometimes, in preference to much more progressive options. So, that's a really that's the danger we're worried about, and this is the fear we have about the way that the independents have approached this, is that people may just simply thought, okay, I'll put the independent first and I'll put Liberal Party second, and then because I prefer the Liberal Party to Labor, even as bad as Liberals become, I still want Liberal-headed Labor. And then they wake up on election day, or rather the day after, and find they've elected Zimmerman. Because what would happen is, let's say 100% of this is not going to happen. Well, let's say 100% of those people who voted for the independent put Liberal Party second. Now, if Kylie Tink gets more votes than the Liberal Party, that's okay. The independent will get elected because Zimmerman's preferences will flow to her. And even though let's say she got 30% of the vote and Zimmerman got 25, let's use those numbers, then she'd get 25. If all of Zimmerman's preferences went to the independent ahead of Labor, then in the counting of second preferences, the Liberal Party would get 55% of the vote and be elected. That's the end of the story. Okay, so there's no problem if the independent beats Liberal. But if it happens that the Liberal still gets more votes than the independent, so you get 30% for Zimmerman and 25% for Kylie, what would then happen is Kylie's second preferences would go to the Liberal Party, 25% they get elected. That's not what people want. Okay? So the worry we have about it is that, okay, I can understand why they didn't want to alienate people, but the result is they might give people a result they do not want. That's exactly right.
Well, I thank you for clearing that up for folks. And there was just one other question that Kieran asked, which I might just bowl at you while we're talking about it, which was this one. What about above the line? Does that change the story?
That's Senate. That's Senate. That's got nothing to do with Liberal Party. No. And nothing to do with House of Reps. That's bringing us into the Senate question.
Yeah, exactly. So do you want to cover that off briefly, Steve?
Yeah, okay. The Senate is it's the sophistication of the House of Reps system on steroids, because rather than getting one candidate across the line, you get 6 across the line, meaning 6 get elected. Okay, so the procedure in the Reps is, as Victor's explained it, is relatively straightforward. Count the first preferences votes. Those with the lowest first preferences get knocked out. Their second preferences then considered, and so on all the way through until you eliminate from the very lowest number of votes through to the aggregate being the highest number of votes. But in the Senate, if you do that, and let's say 30% of the electorate vote Labor and 30% vote Liberal, then they get 2 and a bit candidates each. And that's where it gets to be fun, because the way the Senate works, this again, it's strange. When you first hear it, you think, what's going on here? But it does make sense. If there are 6 positions being elected in a Senate vote, which is the standard situation happening this year, then you get elected if in the end of it all, you have 1/7 of the votes plus 1. Okay, so in other words, when you add up 6 times 1/7 plus 1, you get a remainder which is less than a quota, and therefore you can't get in. So that's the basic idea. So the rule, it's actually, I'll put the website, because it's well explained. It's confusing to some extent, but it's well explained.
You need to take your time on it, don't you?
You do, yeah. Well, not just that. You can actually the same thing if you simply understand what Victor's explained about the House of Reps. The same logic applies for an individual when it comes to the Senate. Okay, but they do. But then how that is then processed is very different. So you sit down as a voter and you put, if you're voting above the line, which is where you vote by party, you put down at least six preferences in order. Okay, your first preference, and again, we'd like that to be TNL. Second preference, we've put, was it the Animal Rights Party we've put down? I've got to look at the Fusion Party is number 2. 3 is the Greens. And so our ranking, like our recommendations, and of course, it's not what people have to do, but it's our recommendations, are based on the quality of the party's policies. Okay? No attempt there's no preference whispering going on here. There's been no deals. This is just, we think, we're the best. Second best is Fusion. Third best is the Greens. 4, 5, 6. Now, once you've done that, under the new rules, you do not have to continue. Okay. Under the rules way back, you used to have to number every last one, just like in the House of Reps. So there's 11 candidates in Victor's seat. You must number all 11 or your vote will be invalid. But in the Senate, once you've numbered 6, that's enough. So if you notice, we don't have Labor or Liberal in our preferences. And what would happen is, and this is something I know people are worried about, and this is why I want to explain slightly more complicated. If you don't like our preferences, this is what you should do to still give us your first preference and then get a vote directed to the party you'd like to have elected, if that party is Labor or even Liberal. Okay. We don't want it, but if that's what you want to do, you can work it out. So ultimately, your final preferences go to the Liberal Party. Yeah. So what happens with the Senate voting is you put 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. You can go 7 out to 23 if you want to, and that way, if you do number the whole lot, then you know that your vote will ultimately be allocated to one of the people you voted for above number 23, one of the parties. But if you don't go beyond the 6 that are necessary, then your vote gets exhausted. If you go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 and counting your vote, and actually none of your selected parties get enough to get a quota, then your vote is exhausted. They're not taken into account. So some people are saying, look, you really should keep on going until you cover every last party that you would like to see in Parliament. And then if you get to the point where you've said these are the say. Let's say there's 11 parties out of the 23 that you wouldn't mind seeing in Parliament. You don't have to continue. Okay. If you're going to say the remaining ones I haven't numbered, I don't want to see those bastards anywhere near Parliament. Okay. So that's making it more responsible overall. So if personally, okay, I might even go against my own how to vote card. Okay. I would possibly end up with Labor as number 7. In what I put down. But when you look at our preferences, if somebody follows our preferences, it's most likely that if we don't get in, the Greens will get the vote. Okay? Because 1, we'll get a large number of preferences for us, we hope. 2, Fusion. 3, the Greens. If any party's likely to get 2 quotas out of it, apart from Labor and Liberal, it's going to be the Greens. Okay? So that's at that point, what we've said to do is likely to be exhausted. The others probably won't come into play. I know this is complicated, so stop me at any point when I'm trying to elaborate this. But that's what you do as an individual.
Yeah.
Now, when it comes to counting the whole thing, it gets more complicated still because, as I said, to get elected, you need 1/7 plus one vote, and that's you can mathematically work out that there's 5 million electors, something of the order of 800,000 votes, something of that level. Now, if people vote Liberal and they put, let's say, 30% of the electorate votes Liberal for the Senate first candidate, then they already get 2 and a bit quotas. So that's 1% more than 2 times 14.5%. So they've got 1% of the vote left over. That then gets reallocated. Now, if Labor say gets 37%, then that's 8% over what's necessary. So that also gets redistributed. So having eliminated parties on the first preference, the ones that didn't get enough votes, they come back in again. Everybody, the whole 23 parties are reconsidered. And they say, okay, let's look at the second preferences of Liberal Party voters and second preferences of Labor Party voters and allocate those across all the parties. Okay? So the excess quota gets redistributed. Now, what it means is when you look at the numbers for New South Wales and the current state of the parties, it's certain, I would say, that both Liberal and Labor will exceed 2 quotas on first preferences. So there will be 2 Liberal Party senators elected. There will be 2 Labor Party senators elected. It's also likely the Greens will get 1 quota. There's the proportion of Greens voters in the entire state is probably of the order of 10 to 15%. Okay, so they're likely to get over on first preferences alone, but they may be slightly short of it. But when the second round goes through, the Greens will get enough. Okay. Well, then there's third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh, blah, 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 all the way down, doing the same elimination process Victor spoke about for the House of Reps with 23 parties now. But in that process, it's possible each time we will get a few of the second preferences, a few of the third, a few of the fourth, a few of the sixth, blah, 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 blah. And ultimately, I could get enough votes to get elected, even if in the Senate, the primary vote for the party is only sort of the order of 2%, let's say. Now, that again would be interpreted, that's a rort, that's been, preference whispering. No, it's exactly what Victor explained previously. It's letting people, disappointing the least number of people. That's the insight, the philosophical foundation of the Australian voting system. And you've got to take your hat off compared to the crap in America and the UK. I mean, and I'll finish after this line. The history of the Monty Python election night special? Okay? That is not a comedy. That is a documentary of what happens. And in British voting, if there are 3 candidates and one gets 17,000 votes and another one gets 15,000 votes, and then there's somebody who's on the same side as the minority who gets enough votes to mean that if there hadn't been 2 candidates, candidate A would have won. But candidate C comes in and splits the vote between A and B, and the minority that voted for B end up getting they win. Okay, there's Kevin Phillips Bong who gets 0 votes, and so Tarquin Fintin Lin Bin Bang 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 Patang Ole Biscuit Barrel splits the vote in one of the and a minority gets party people don't want gets elected. So you've got to take your hat off to the people who designed these laws in the first place. So I'm shutting up for a moment, and I'll come back with that below the line.
No, Steve, that's very important. But I mean, the point again to underscore it, right? A lot of people don't understand how the mechanics work, so therefore they don't actually use the form the right way, and therefore I don't know what proportion of votes are actually invalidated, but I suspect it's quite high, simply because people don't actually understand what they need to do.
It's partly invalidated, but it also means they vote in a way that means they don't get the result they want.
Yeah,
and that's the danger. So what we're saying is, think literally, just very carefully. Who would you like to have as your first idea, your definitely preferred candidate, but who's number 2 and who's number 3 and who don't you want to get in? Yep. Now, in the House of Reps, you must number all of those. But in the Senate, what you can do is say, well, I definitely want TNL, I'd like to get them in. But if they don't get it, I'd like Fusion. If they don't get it, I'd like the Greens, and down you go. But at the end of it, I wanted to go to Labor. So you would put, say, number 6 if you wanted to Labor, or number 7, and then the exhaustive process will stop at Labor, but Liberals don't get a look in. Okay, so the way you do the Senate is sort of which parties do I simply not want to be in the Senate? Don't number them.
Yep.
Okay. Then the other ones, which ones would I like? Number them in the sequence of your own personal preferences for them. And then the Senate system will very intelligently go through and diligently make sure that the smallest number of people are disappointed by the outcome.
Absolutely. And my strategy has always been to work out which ones I definitely don't want to appear at all, right? Get rid of those first. And then what I've got left, then I'll sort of, yeah. But that's a very weird way of thinking about how to solve the problem.
But it works very well. I mean, and this is something which is common in Australia and New Zealand. And New Zealand has an even more sophisticated system called the Hare-Clark system, and so does Tasmania, and I think also the ACT. They actually apply the same system as the Senate and the House of Reps. So you have multiple candidates selected for a regional electorate, which is actually more effective representation in many ways anyway. And you therefore get a better expression. It's not just Labor versus Liberal. It's, you could have a House of Reps seat that ends up having, 2 Labor, 2 Liberal, and 3 Green, and one Brindle. So it's a very, very fair system. Australia's far in advance of America or the UK in how it handles that.
I want to put Liberal below last, but the ballot paper isn't long enough. That's quite a good comment. Very good. Well, okay, I think we've done that to death. But I thought it was really, really important, right? Because, as I said last time when you spoke about it, Steve, a lot of people really didn't understand. But I want to just, before you disappear, I want to talk about one other thing. ScoMo, of course, as part of his launch, bottled another, housing strategy, housing policy, whatever you call it, housing bribe, housing
rort.
Housing rort. I've done a number of radio and television interviews about this in recent days, basically saying, well, it's going to put prices up. It's not going to solve anything. Naturally, it's even worse because you're basically debilitating superannuation in the process. Anything else to add to that?
Well, it's both parties. The expression that I borrow from David Bowie's song, they're putting out fire with gasoline. Okay, yes. They're trying to damp the bubble by throwing fuel on the bubble. So in the case of the Labor Party policy, which is, we'll pay 40% of the price, you can pay 60%. That means the money that people have saved and borrowed to buy a house now inflates 60% of the house price, and the other 40% is created by the government. That's going to pump house prices another 40% up, because if you borrowed $1 million to buy a house before the Labor policy, then you'd pay $1 million for it, so the price is $1 million. But now, if you go with the Labor policy, you pay $1 million, they add another 400,000, you pay 1.4 million for the bloody thing, and it just puts up the prices even further. Now, the Liberal Party is, let's hand your whole financial worth over to the superannuation industry, over to the finance sector. But it says you can use your super as a deposit. So you might have, you've got saved and borrowed $1 million, and then you've got 500,000 in super. So you pay 1.5 million for the house. Your super's down to zero. The house price is 1.5 million. They've handed it over to the vendor, and you're going to be in hock for the rest of your life, paying off a $1.5 million. Your net worth has gone into the house. Okay, your net use would have been $1 million in the house price value, notional value, and 500,000 in super. Thanks to the Labor Party, to the Liberal Party policy, your value will be $1.5 million for the house and zero in super. So you better hope the bubble keeps on happening. Okay, they're both. Let's let the bubble keep on going until the end of the universe. Okay, life, the universe, and everything will end when the Australian housing bubble bursts. Well, bullshit. We've got to prick the fucking thing. Okay, let's be frank here. It's too close. We want to prick the bubble, but prick it in such a way that people's equity in their homes, not their houses, I'm not talking landlords here, the house you actually own and live in, your equity will be maintained. So we wanted to use what we call a monetary reset. And everybody gets, and I'm going to use a round number here, so if any journalist wants to rip into this, go right ahead. I'll come back and say it's a round number, $100,000 per adult. Imagine a two-person family, 200,000. The monetary reset requires them to pay their debt off. So if they have a debt of $800,000 for a house, they have to reduce that to $600,000. So the monetary reset reduces their debt by 200,000. And we're going to try as well to bring house prices down by 200,000. What if you lost? Nothing. Okay, your equity in the house remains constant. You used to owe they say the house was $1 million and your debt was 800,000, so your equity was 200,000. We go through this process. We give you 200,000. We also cause house prices to fall by changing how banks are allowed to lend for housing. House price falls to 800. You owe 600. What's your equity? $200,000. But in fact, you now have a shorter time until you've paid your debt off. Because rather than having to pay off 800,000 over X years, you're now paying 600,000 over X years. Even though your equity has remained constant, you're actually better off as a homeowner. No, you're not going to happen. You'll have no debt and be happy. That's what we're aiming for, Jeff. Now, at the same time, if you're a renter, then you get 200,000. This is the first, a couple of renters, two renters. This is the first time any parties put forward a policy which benefits renters. Now, what we do to stop that causing an inflationary takeoff on the economy, we could say, and this is our policy at the moment, that if you have no debt, then you have to buy $200,000 worth of bonds off the banks, which will buy the bonds that are involved in the whole financial operation of the monetary reset. And therefore, we hope we're going to restore normal interest rates, so bonds will go back to 3% interest. So you're going to get 3% on 200,000 coming out of this, which is, a bit over $100 a week. So the impact of our policy benefits renters, and it's the very first policy ever put forward that benefits renters. It's intended to bring house prices down, but to do it in such a way that homeowners don't suffer. Landlords, you might have a problem.
But the other interesting observation you made, I think when you talk about the modelling, it actually gives an economic kick to the economy as well, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. What you're doing is you're fundamentally increasing liquidity of people who spend more rapidly. You're taking money out of the finance sector, where the people in the finance sector exchange money all the time amongst themselves, and it takes forever to turn up in the real economy. So if you take money away from the finance sector and put it into, as the American expression, from Wall Street to Main Street spends faster on goods produced by Main Street, and the economy gets a boost. And so it actually would stimulate the economy, reduce the private debt level, reduce the debt burden, enable normal interest rates to come back again rather than the zero crap we have at the moment, and get us away from this fetish of having no government debt. Because when you have no government debt, you have no government created money. And this is what leads to financial crises. So we're saying the real problem in a capitalist economy is too much private debt, not too much government debt. And government debt is not really debt. Long explanation. I explain that on my website on the money creation thing for keenforthesenate.com. I won't necessarily go into that here. But there would be a beneficial policy for the economy and get us away from just forever inflating the housing bubble.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I've said a few times, and I'll say it again, the only party that I have seen that's got a strategic thought as to how to deal with housing is the TNL, right? Everybody else is just doing the same old again, or trying to sort of stick more string and elastoplast and stuff around the edge to sort of keep the bubble a little bit, constrained or a little bit bigger. But strategically, none of that's going to work. The only way to actually solve this is to take a strategic U-turn and do something different, which is why I think the policy is really very interesting.
Thank you.
Okay. Now, there's quite a few different things going on in the chat. But, Victor, one of the questions I wanted to chat with you about was paddling. Paddling. Okay. Which is a sort of a way into the little video that you made. I thought I might play it. I thought I might play it now. In case there are people who haven't actually seen it, this is actually worth a watch. And just for Victor and Steve, you won't hear the sound, but you'll see the vision. And I'll come back when I've played it. So this is I'm going to play it now.
Hi, I'm Victor Kline. I'm leader of TNL, and we have a policy for net zero emissions by 2030 to stop the rising waters. If we wait another 20 or 30 years like Liberal, Labor and the Independent want, we'll be in deep water. So if you live in the federal seat of North Sydney and you care about real action on climate change, vote 1, Victor Kline. Before it's...
Now, I have to say, Victor, well done. That was quite brilliant. Where did you get the idea from, and what was it like to actually have to perform it?
Well, my longtime friend and campaign manager, Steve Hockley, who is amongst other things, the founder of the Sydney Shakespeare Company, a brilliant writer and stage director. He wrote the script, he directed me in the water, and he filmed it on my phone. And it was a lot of fun. I was actually in the water for 2.5 hours.
Oh, my God.
Yeah. Well, we had a lot of takes to get it right. And this was down at Balmoral. And if you know Balmoral, there's a huge sort of multi-restaurant complex up on the promenade. And as we were walking, dripping across the beach, this guy came down and said, "Oh, look, I hope you don't think I'm rude, but we're all up there in the restaurant glued to the window watching you for the last 2 hours, and we just wondered what the hell you were doing." And I said, "Well, we're making a film to highlight the dangers of climate change." And he said, "Oh, well, good on you, and I'll go back and tell everybody in the restaurant I was the delegate sent down to find out what was happening." But it was fun, and I didn't get cold for some reason. It was like my suit became a wet suit. Pardon the pun. Kept me warm somehow. But quite fascinating. Really.
What was the dry cleaning bill?
The dry cleaning was a normal dry cleaning bill. I took it to my dry cleaner. I said, I've been in salt water for 2.5 hours. He said, I can fix. And he did. So.
It's wonderful.
Yeah, and it's worth saying, of course, that it got a show on Gruen.
It did. Well, it did. And I had no idea that was going to happen. I was just at home doing something, and I got about 12 text messages at the same time saying, "You're on Gruen." I go, what the hell are you talking about? I'm not on Gruen. I'm in my bedroom, But anyway, yeah.
And as you'd expect, of course, you polarised the chat as you polarised Twitter and everybody else, right? Because there are people who are less convinced about the climate change story. But I have to say that, as somebody who's studied this quite a long time, I think this is a really important message. And I thought the way that it was done was totally effective. So many congratulations. I just wanted to get the full story. And you were telling me earlier on that actually it's gone pretty much viral globally.
Yeah, well, we've had 1 million views now.
Oh, wow.
Got picked up by a couple of big influencers in the UK. So I think most of those views are in the UK and Europe, but at least a couple of 100,000. I mean, I can't meet a person now without them having seen it. So it's got out there, It's it's good timing for us just before an election.
Absolutely, yeah.
As somebody said, never mind all your wonderful policies. Most of your votes will come because of that. But that's okay. We don't mind at all.
Well, yeah, good on you for doing it. And there's a very serious point here, and that is, of course, that sea levels, are not static. The fact is that the ice load is actually decreasing. And, I was reading something the other day, and it was in one of the IPCC reports, that the potential trajectory of sea levels is extremely concerning.
Yeah. At the same time, that's not the main danger. And this is one of the. I think it was fantastic theatre. I absolutely love the clip, and it's a great way to raise the issue. But if you look at what the dangers are from climate change, people say, the sea's rising. Oh, that's going to lose a few coastal houses. It's the complete change of the weather patterns of the planet. That's the scary side of things. And this could mean that the area which is currently producing wheat on the planet becomes a dust bowl. And then you have, and this is from an OECD report written last year, where the lead author was a research colleague of mine, Tim Lenton, the climate scientist at Essex University. They said the effect on food output would be catastrophic out of a 2.5 degree increase in temperature and losing what's called colloquially the Gulf Stream. So, and that would actually eliminate, funnily enough, it's North Atlantic, where the models say it will eliminate the dry farming sections of the Australian continent. So we would not be able to produce wheat or corn anymore. So these are the sort of consequences people, when they think, sea level rise, that'll only affect coastal houses and it's going to take a century, blah, blah, blah. This could happen in the next 20 years. And then you'd have a food shortage like never before on the planet. because of 2.5 degrees and losing the Gulf Stream, which is quite now much more possible than climate scientists thought it was 10 or 15 years ago. So the message is, the theatrical carrying the message is brilliant. And don't think, oh, the sea level rise is going to take so long. Long before the sea level rises, you'll be starving.
Yep.
That's why it matters.
Yep. And of course, the other factor is it's the energy, the increased energy, in the system because of the warmer temperatures, which means you get bigger storms and bigger floods and bigger. So there's a reason why we've had really dramatic global stories about the temperatures in India at the moment. I mean, it's to do with the greater energy that's being created because of what's happened.
The energy which we're trapping from the sun. This is why it's called global warming for a good reason. It's not that we're pumping heat into the atmosphere, it's that the gas we're putting out, some of the gases, carbon dioxide and methane in particular, is meaning that the heat that comes in doesn't go out as fast. So it's like you're throwing an extra blanket on yourself in bed and your temperature's already 37 degrees and a couple more blankets and you hit 42, 43 and you start to die of heat exhaustion. And the biggest dilemma for that in terms of actual heat deaths is the Indian subcontinent, all the modelling that's been done. That's where you're likely to get the highest level of temperature increase. And what's called a wet bulb temperature is the key one. And that is when the combination, if you have 35 degrees Celsius temperature and 100% humidity, then your wet bulb temperature is 35. And at that level, you can no longer perspire. Your internal body temperature is 37 degrees. You can't sweat enough to reduce your temperature for your own body. So your body temperature starts to rise. And then after about 6 hours, doesn't matter how fit you are, doesn't matter how healthy you are, without access to something where the temperature around you is dropped like air conditioning unit, you will die. You've got about 6 hours. And so the scare is that if we hit, it won't be 35 degrees plus 100%. It'll be, say, as it has been in India, 50 degrees plus, say, 65%. That combination hits some region in India. Everybody who has an air conditioning unit will turn it on. That will cause the power system to break down, so nobody will have air conditioning. And then everybody's trying to avoid the heat, and they can't. And if it lasts for 6 hours, they'll all be dead. Now, that sounds dramatic. Okay, yes, it is. And that's the opening chapter of Kim Stanley Robinson's recent book, The Ministry for the Future. That is the catastrophe that makes people realise, shit, this is serious. So he has a section of Hyderabad, some part of India, where this happens, and there's one Westerner who survives, but the entire town dies of heat exhaustion in one day. And so this is the sort of stuff we're talking about. It's not, you're not going to have, slightly more water lapping over your feet if you have a house on the edge of Balmoral. This is eliminating the possibility for mammalian life in large parts of the planet. Yeah.
And the point there really is that, Victor's stunt was symbolic, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a great symbol.
Yeah, and that's the point. So, because I've had a few people in the chat say, well, we don't want to see that amount of water rise, Somebody's saying, well, I've got a property in Tasmania and, oops, let me just put that one up, should I be worried, should I sell, sort of thing, prove it that I should sell. Well,
irrelevant.
That's not quite the point, is it?
No, that's on the scale of misunderstanding the preferential voting system.
Yeah. But the point is that symbolism, right, is a way of trying to make a bigger point, and that's the bigger point is the one you've just made, Steve. That's really what I want to underscore. And so, and again,
I'm going to have to just disappear shortly, by the way, guys, because it's actually early in the morning here, and I'm about to go off and grab a Tesla and drive from Austin, Texas, to Boca Chica and check out Elon Musk's Starbase. It's my little present to myself, finding myself over here, having done an interview yesterday with Lex Friedman at his request at this date. So I had to leave. This is a chance to meet a huge audience through Lex's remarkable interviews, and I had that interview yesterday. So now I'm giving myself a treat of a couple of days of being a techno geek and checking out the Gigafactory in Texas, in Austin, and then driving down to see the rockets at Starbase.
Brilliant. Well, you have a lovely time. It is quite amazing what's going on down there in the world of tech and space. It's quite remarkable. So I hope you enjoy it. And Steve, I really appreciate your coming on tonight and being part of the show. That was a lovely surprise. So thank you very much.
Okay, and I'll head off and have breakfast at 6 8. I will, mate. Indeed, and we can talk about it at the North Sydney. Did we mention that?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, the North Sydney Hotel, that's where TNL, whether we win, lose, or get, whatever, we're partying at the North Sydney Hotel.
Free drinks for anyone wearing the TNL T-shirt too.
That's right. Yeah. So I'm going to dig mine out of my luggage and have it there, because I get back at 7:00 in the morning on election day. I've got to grab some leaflets to go vote for me leaflets, which are going to feel ridiculous, and go to Hurstville, my mother's old suburb, and hand out there.
That gives you an hour's campaigning before the polls open.
Oh, yeah, sure. I think I'm being picked up by Jean-Pierre. I'm not sure who it is, but they're going to grab me and then take me to where they've got the leaflets printed out for me. So I'll get the leaflets in a sandwich board, and then I'll go and do as best I can until jet lag hits, and then I'll probably head off to North Sydney and beach to the pub.
We'll roll you into the pub.
Okay, guys. Lovely to chat.
See you, Steve. Take care.
See you on the 21st.
Good luck.
Okay. Bye.
Bye.
All right, so Victor, it's just you and I now, but that was great to have Steve on to cover those points. Now, one of the other issues I wanted to chat with you about was the whole question of truth and trust in politics.
Yeah.
Because that seems to me one of the issues which is really very important, but actually neither of the main parties really wanted to touch it. But to me, it's a big issue.
Oh, I think everybody, it's in some ways it's the biggest issue, isn't it, Martin? I mean, because the reason why, the independence movement has arisen and why our party and other parties have arisen is people lost that trust. They were getting demoralised by never hearing the truth and having to vote for their least worst option. And the major parties don't want to talk about it. But yeah, it's difficult. It's a really difficult. I've come across quite a few dirty tricks in this campaign, I must say. I knew everybody in the world knows that politics has dirty tricks in it. It's interesting though when you're in the midst of it, and when they impact directly on you. And when they're based in, terrible lies and terrible spinning of the truth into something that, barely resembles that truth. So, very important. There's a wonderful, on SBS now, by the way, wonderful Icelandic political show. I wish I could remember the name of it, but there aren't too many Icelandic political shows on SBS, so it's probably reasonably easy to find, where the whole theme is about truth and trust. But I think that's the question across the globe, isn't it? It's not just Australia. People have lost faith in politics, and they've lost faith because they don't believe what they hear. And of course, there's a terrible side to this, and that is that even when you're telling the truth, people don't believe you. And in some ways, if let's say you've got a wonderful policy like Steve Keen's affordable housing policy, that actually, as you say, is structural in nature. It isn't just some straw and Band-Aids on the edge. It's actually structural in nature. It has the possibility on a long-term basis to solve the problem. Now, you tell that to people, and there's a tendency for them not to believe you because it's too good to be true, So that they have a situation where they may very well believe the outright lies that are being told to them because they're minimal or small. We'll give you $2,000, when you buy a new house or something like that they never intend to give. They might believe that, but when you actually have a solution, they might tend to disbelieve it. So it really mucks up the system, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And, it's fascinating how many people now just assume that everything they hear is untrue, right? So they really don't trust anybody or anything. So the whole plane of society really is being degraded because basically nobody trusts anybody, nobody believes anything. And that's a really concerning social issue as well as a political issue, isn't it?
Yeah, it really is. And the only solution that I can see is, so we say we're a party of truth, okay, but the only solution would be to get into some position of either government or balance of power and do the things we said we were going to do and demonstrate that they can actually happen. And then, and, you can't expect, you can't blame people for doubting everything you say, because that's what they've been trained up to do. So somehow you've got to get a crack in the system, get yourself in, tell the truth, demonstrate that you've told the truth, and then maybe people start to get some faith back in the system. But that's very hard to do because there is a vested interest from the established parties and industries and power bases to stop you doing that, because if you do it, then by definition you distinguish yourself from the others and they become distrusted and you become trusted. And that would be the worst possible thing that could happen to them. You know what I mean?
Well,
it's been and it's fascinating to by the way, and it's kind of tangential, but it's fascinating to watch the two-party system under threat. We've had a number of debates in the North Sydney electorate. Various organisations have arranged debates, or meet the candidates, they usually call them. And of course, the Liberal and Labor candidates attack one another reasonably regularly. But when it comes to the question of how the structure of politics should be, they suddenly become the best of buddies in saying that, the country's security rests more firmly in the two-party system. It's quite funny to see their animosity melt into a kind of mutual smoochiness, when we're talking about how a possible big crossbench.
And it's very interesting, isn't it, that those two major parties both are saying precisely the same thing. Oh, it's going to create problems. We need strong government. That means we can't have all of these fractional elements. But in fact, there is probably an alternative line of argument that says, well, both major parties have failed because they're basically dancing the same tune and not actually a tune that necessarily benefits the majority of people. We want something different, and actually a more fractured structure gives the opportunity for a different game.
Absolutely. And I mean, they definitely ignore the fact that many European countries work under a multi-party system where they are required to always form, the Scandinavian countries, for example, they're always required to form some type of coalition. And of course, people make the point that we've been governed by a coalition for a long time, anyway, so it's not a good argument. I think one of the funniest things that I constantly hear in these debates from one or other of the Labor or Liberal candidate, there was a wonderful person called Ted Mack, who was the mayor of North Sydney and was the only person in the last 120 years who wasn't a Liberal elected to the seat of North Sydney. He had 2 terms as an independent mayor. And one or other of the major candidates will quote Ted Mack in saying that he spent 6 years in Parliament and achieved bugger all. They quote that to indicate how useless it is to have independence in Parliament. But of course, the reason he achieved bugger all is that the two parties made damn sure that he couldn't achieve anything. But if you have, as could quite possibly be the case, 16 to 18 people in the crossbench, then they can't do that to you. They've got to dance to your tune. They've got to do things for the actual benefit of the populace. I've taken to quoting a lot in these debates. What I see as the darkest moment in Australian politics in the last 30 or 40 years. And it's really saying something, because there's been some terrible things like children overboard and bushfires and, COVID and the whole. But the darkest moment for me personally because of its symbolism. We were talking about symbolism before, was when it was suggested prior to the handing down of the budget, was suggested to Treasurer Frydenberg that he should take in Parliament, that he should take into account the welfare of the Australian people in formulating that budget. And his response was to laugh, Now that's desperately black and macabre to me. That the very thing government is supposed to do, i.e. take into account the welfare of the Australian people, caused the treasurer of the nation to laugh. It was a real giveaway that we're in the business of businesses, as one right-wing journalist calls government. We're not the business of looking after the welfare of the Australian people.
Yeah.
Don't make me laugh,
But that's a really important point, because it comes back to me to a fundamental question, which is, what is society for?
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. And it seems to me to be, if I can sort of draw two quick pictures, there is one model of society where basically the fundamental outcome is supporting businesses, and you've got all the worker bees basically who are cannon fodder to enable the businesses to create and grow more and become ever more dominant, right? And there's another model of society that says, no, actually, the purpose of society is to make the world better for everybody, and to improve the well-being and life of individuals and communities. And businesses might help with that or not, but they're part of the surrounding supporting mechanism, all right, and politics too. Yeah. But the end game is actually a better community, better society, right? And it seems to me those two models are actually so opposed. And actually, if you strip back politics, that's actually a lot of the dilemma between the two sides of the politics as well.
Absolutely. But the great tragedy, given the particular history of Australia, 20th century history of Australia, and this doesn't apply to a lot of countries, but we had something kind of special going on here in the 50s and 60s and 70s. We had a country where there was full employment, where businesses were supported, and the upshot was that every working person who wanted a job had a job. The middle class were very comfortable, and the wealthy were wealthy, but not obscenely so.
No.
And I think there are very few people, other than perhaps, rabid communists, there are very few people who begrudge a wealthy person being wealthy, provided, if you're a middle-class person, you're not going to begrudge a wealthy person being wealthy if you own your home and you have 2 cars and your kids, get a decent education. And if you're a working-class person and, you can put food on the table and also own your home and have 1 car, you're not going to begrudge the middle-class person or the wealthy person. But unfortunately, people have this tendency to go to extremes, largely, I think, often out of fear. If those workers get a $10 wage rise, we'll be destroyed. If we have to pay those cotton picking slaves, then the whole cotton industry will go down the drain. And I've watched this country go from this. I'm not saying it was perfect, but in economic terms, a country that was an egalitarian prize to something that, is much closer to the majority of societies throughout history, where more and more people are getting poorer and poorer, and more people are getting pushed below the poverty line. It's just not necessary, and you don't have to, as the Greens are suggesting, punish the billionaires by taxing them more. If you understand the nature of a sovereign government and what it can do in terms of money creation and investment in society, you can say, well, look, you've got your money, good luck to you, however you got it, you can keep it, but we're not going to tolerate this gig society anymore. We're not going to tolerate this situation where people can't make a living. We're not going to tolerate this situation where people can't afford to buy their houses. We as a government will invest in that. And if you billionaires can't become squillionaires, well, I'm sure you'll cope. I think there's a divisiveness. There's a class divisiveness that's grown up in what was once an egalitarian country. and it saddens me. And one of the saddest things when we're talking about telling the truth is you can tell young people that it is possible to get back to the sea. I can describe, for example, the kind of country I lived in, and can tell them that we can get back to that. And they really find it difficult to believe because they've not known it. That's the trouble when the inequities go on for too long. People forget the state of affairs that existed before. So that's the challenge for people who want to make a difference and get the economic situation back to the way it was.
Yeah, and I think you make a really important point, because it's the old parable of the frog in the pan, isn't it? You turn it up slowly and
Absolutely.
You don't notice it, and then you look around and think, hang on a moment, I've lost a few freedoms there. Things I could do, I can't do anymore. But then the next generation who comes along says, well, that's the way it is. There's no other way. And then the next generation moves a bit further. And so if you're not careful, over a period of a few generations, you can completely degrade the fundamental beliefs and freedoms that were there, which is why I sort of come back to my question about, well, what's society for in the first place, right? Because there is a fundamental point, it seems to me, that if we aren't... Go on.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, and you're quite right, but we don't discuss that question, do we?
We don't.
Or anything like it. I mean, I seriously cannot watch the leaders' debates because they're talking at the level of infants, and worse than that, they're not even talking, they're arguing. They're bickering at the level of infants. Give them a rattle each, and they can bang each other over the head with the rattle, and we'll put a playpen around them.
It was pretty much a content-less campaign, wasn't it? I mean, it was just little bickering, as you say, around the edge. But none of those more philosophical questions, which I think should have been there, were actually explored, which is disgraceful, really.
Yeah, and I really think that. The journalists, the Australian journalists, needs to take up the cudgel there. just conduct interviews like you're conducting, where you ask big questions. There's nothing wrong with asking big questions. It's not embarrassing. It's not. There's this idea that the Australian punter is so stupid that if you ask a big question, they'll be all just sort of confused and frightened and everything. But, if you take aside any citizen in this country, whatever their level of education, and you start talking to them about what is the purpose of a society, they'll have an opinion on that, and they will have thought about that.
Yep.
Now, they may have thought about it in a different way than you have, but they will have thought about it. Nobody's going to be scandalised if a journalist asks the sort of questions that you ask. And politicians answer them. Hopefully we can get that going again.
Well, I think we need to, because it's a big problem insofar that once you start arguing what society is for, that then takes you to a series of priorities, right? Because you will invest more in X rather than Y, and you'll do this and you won't do that, right? So there are consequences for that decision, right? Yeah. Whereas if you go up the other way and say, well, I've got this policy and I'm going to do this, without any of that overarching architecture, either it doesn't exist at all, or worse, there is an implicit assumption of how society works and what society is for.
Yeah,
and
that's right.
That's never exposed.
That's never exposed.
Yeah.
Absolutely right.
And you touched on the media, and in fact, Kieran made this point a little while ago, talking about the Murdoch media has a lot to do with perhaps some of the shenanigans that's going on. But interestingly, you had quite a lot of exposure on the Murdoch media, right?
Yeah, we were talking about this off air, weren't we? And it's one of the I've struck many ironies in this campaign and in the preceding 2 years, but I think this is the greatest irony. So we have two policies, two parts of our broader media policy that you can put side by side. One says, in simple terms, that we plan to, in effect, dismantle the Murdoch empire. We want to bring back the cross-media ownership rules. We want to bring an end to foreign ownership of Australian media. We want to bring an end to monopolisation of media in certain geographic areas, so that the only paper in a city, 4 of our capital cities, the only paper is a Murdoch media. It's a really tough and, quite frankly, anti-Murdoch empire kind of policy. On the other hand, we want to grow the ABC, triple its budget, make it an export quality producing production place, and entrench the ABC's right to existence, its right to independence, and its right to proper funding in our Bill of Rights to be entrenched in the Constitution. Now, you'd think under those circumstances that if anybody was going to be favourable to TNL, it would be the ABC. And if anybody wanted to have a nice crack at TNL, it would be the Murdoch press. It's been the literal exact opposite. I've now had 5 major media pieces in Murdoch, three television appearances on Sky News, 2 big articles in the Australian, articles in the local Murdoch media, the Mossman Daily and the Manly Daily and so on, the North Shore Times. The ABC has absolutely ignored us apart until Gruen came along, and that's kind of slightly different. It's not a political show. It just so happened that we had an advertisement that tickled their fancy. Now, I find this astonishing, and it's astonishing because, why is Murdoch being kind to us, and why is the ABC, who would benefit from our policies, being so obdurate? And I say obdurate because if you go onto Twitter any day of the week, you'll see some ABC journalist is advertising that they're going to have Barnaby Joyce on again or something like that, and 100 people will jump on Twitter and say, "Why don't you have TNL? Why don't you have Steve Keen? Why don't you have Vic Kline?" They've got things to say, but they remain unmoved by that. I don't know. It's one day we'll work out why all this is happening, but right now it's quite funny. That's all I can say.
No, it certainly is. And I have to say, watching the media circus when the pollies are out doing their little walk around or their little exercises, icing cakes or whatever it is that ScoMo does, right?
Trying to shake somebody's hand.
I know. But the quality of the questioning from the media is, it's pretty disgusting. And in fact, my read is that most of the time they're just basically swallowing whatever's being thrown out. There's very little, other than gotcha moments, which really doesn't help anybody, right? There's no real exposure of real issues. So the whole thing is just degraded, and it's more and more, in my experience, to the US way of campaigning, which is less and less beneficial, because basically, why bother? Why bother watching it? Why bother, in fact, going through the process, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Now, there's another interesting question that came in a little while ago from Mediocre YouTube Comments, lovely name for a title. Need a big crossbench to keep the purchased parties honest. They are both moving closer towards one another in a concerning way. They even receive equal donations from the same places. Now, that's an interesting observation. Certainly, I know that, for example, the mining and finance sectors donate to both big parties, I guess, for influence. But what's your reaction to that sort of statement? Do you think that's right?
It absolutely nails it, in my opinion.
Yeah.
And the upshot is that the policies are quite indistinguishable. I mean, when you start enumerating them, and there are many more than I can think of off the top of my head, but the two parties voted unanimously together to block the Murdoch Royal Commission. They voted unanimously together to weaken donation laws so that they can get now donations from, cigarette companies, the alcohol companies, the mafia, if they want. It's pretty much open slather. They voted together to increase surveillance opportunities for government, so that you've now got a situation where a government agency like the AFP or so on can require an IT company which has been contracted by Company X to hack the computers of Company X and give the results to the government. In other words, to do down the people that are employing them, and do that in secret. They've got together to pass ridiculous laws aimed at eliminating large numbers of small and emerging political parties from the political scene. And my favourite, of course, they've got together to vote unanimously to have to give the Minister for Immigration absolute power to send back a proven refugee to their death if she or he so sees fit. And if for whatever reason, in some cases, the country won't take them, then to throw that person in jail for the rest of their lives. I say this in meetings and debates, and I usually repeat it because it's so horrible that the human brain finds it very hard to take in. You know, someone's come to this country and have put up their hand and asked for asylum, for help. And instead of being assessed as to whether they are a refugee, and if they are a refugee, give them asylum, and if the system says you're not, then send them back. Find them to be a refugee and then either send them back to their death anyway, or throw them in prison for the rest of their lives. I mean, why this level of obscene cruelty needs to exist, I don't know. But when you have both parties getting together on all that, there's no distinction between the two. And I enjoy saying that the last sliver of light between the two parties disappeared when Albanese set up in North Queensland that the Labor Party is now the party of the aspirational voter, the term used for the Liberal Party ever since Menzies, you know. So, yeah.
Well, and of course, the track record is that when one side announces a policy, the other side says, we'll do it too, right? I mean, you saw that through the election because they didn't want to create any light between them. So in a way, you've got this power block of two parties who superficially appear to be pulling in two different directions, but 95% of the time they're actually the same.
Oh, yeah, and absolutely. And what you've hit it on the head when you say appear to be pulling in two different directions. They like to give that impression, particularly during a campaign, so that people think they've got a choice. But as the questioner said, I mean, you know, you do need a big crossbench to break this down. And I think we will get a big crossbench. It's altogether possible to have a crossbench of somewhere between 16 and 18 after this election, made up of Homes of Court funded independents, new Green members, hopefully some of our members as well. I mean, you see it like here in North Sydney, where Trent Zimmerman is under enormous threat from at least three fronts. You know, we've got a bunch of letters in the mail today. We voters of North Sydney, one from the Honourable John Howard, former Prime Minister of Australia, one from the ex-mayor of Willoughby, one from, I can't remember that, but I went out on the pre-polling booths today, and there was Trent Zimmerman, but there was also Bruce Baird and Matt Keane, and you know, I don't know if that's going to help. Any of this is going to help them, but it shows you the sort of fear that, you know, that they're suffering from. In previous elections, Trent Zimmerman would, you know, trot along to a few functions and smile and kiss some babies and stuff like that and duly be elected. It's quite fascinating to see. It's almost a panic, you know, it's almost a panic. And I think it's a good thing Now, their response to that is, not surprisingly, not to think, gee, maybe we should do something innovative to try and, trump the TNL or the independents or something like that. Their natural instinct is to pull closer together and make the situation look even more like a monopoly or even a duopoly.
Absolutely, and it goes right back to that funding observation from earlier on.
I think one of the funny things about the funding, when you were saying that they get the same funding, they sort of do, but if you look closely, those companies, they do donate to both. They give slightly less to the Labor Party. I think I don't know what the psychology of that is. I'll leave that to the viewer to decide, but always slightly less, 200,000 to the Liberal Party, 180,000 to Labor. That's it.
Absolutely, but it does show you the tyranny of power and money, right? And of course, the other point there is that they expect something in return. And if you look carefully at the mining sector and the finance sector, they actually just don't do it for the benefit of society. They do it for their own benefit, and that's part of the problem.
And absolutely. And as somebody made the point the other day, I mean, it's not really even a situation, this mining company gives $1 million to the Liberal Party. They don't say, hey, listen, we're going to give you $1 million, but we expect you to do A, B, and C for us. I don't think they do that. They may in some cases, but I think the majority, it was about that natural, there's a term in psychology for tendency to reciprocity, first of all. Somebody's, giving you a lot of money and help you get elected and keep your job, you're going to want to do something nice for them. And what's more, if you want to get elected next time, you want to do it nice. You want to do something nice for them to make sure that they give you some more money next time. So it's a bit like I remember I knew the opinions editor of the Packer Empire back in the day, and I said to him, "Does Packer tell you what to write?" And he said, "No, he doesn't have to. I know what he wants me to write." And I think the politicians know what the donors want them to do. I mean, you're a donor, you're in the business of fossil fuel. You don't want to go out of business. So, the politician knows that, it's on them to keep you in business.
Exactly right. Vested interest left, right and centre.
Yeah.
Now, there was a question a little earlier on about some of the international organisations like the World Health Organization and the World Economic Forum and Klaus Schwab. Yeah. What's your perspective on, because there are some people who think that a lot of what's going on at the moment is really not necessarily locally driven bottom up, but it's almost sort of top down being imposed. And then they sort of point to Schwab saying, you'll own nothing and be happy, all those sorts of things, right? And I suppose I've always got this conspiracy versus cock-up theory of history. I tend to go to the cock-up theory of history rather than the conspiracy theory of history because it's damn hard to make anything happen locally, let alone globally.
Yeah,
what's your perspective on all of that?
I would agree. I think, like everything else, it's a bit of both. But, since I've been deeply involved in Australian politics, I really do see the major drivers of what people do and why they do it. When I say people, I mean the politicians as being domestic. Sure, they might take into account what Biden and Johnson want, and so they chuck the French submarines overboard and get the new submarines. Yeah, sure, there's going to be that stuff, but pretty much all the decisions they make are about how to service their benefactors. And that's very much, it's an international issue insofar as some of the benefactors are multinational companies, I guess. But that's kind of different from the foreign political pressure. I think most of it's very domestic.
Yeah, and the fact is, of course, there's common thinking in multiple countries. Another example, right, is central bank policy, right? So For a number of years, everyone was taking rates lower and doing quantitative easing. Now, you can either say, well, somebody at the centre said that's going to be the policy for the next 5 years, or it's actually everybody making decisions but based within a certain philosophical environment that they're all exposed to, and therefore they're making the similar decisions. They're all looking at each other and saying, well, they're doing it, so I'll do it, right?
Absolutely. It's got to be that. It's you don't need a conspiracy. It's fashion. It's a desire not to be left out of the club. You can take any profession, if you like, the profession of lawyers that I'm in, and you'll find that, everything from how you phrase your latest argument in court to what sort of, tie you wear is all because you look out of your peripheral vision and you check out what other people are saying and what sort of tie they're wearing, and everybody does it at the same time. And within 2 days, everybody's got the same spotted tie, and the same, if it pleased the court, blah, blah, blah. So, I think the profession of central banking is going to be exactly the same.
Yeah, absolutely. And Frost21 said, well, does the cock-up theory versus conspiracy theory make a difference? Because basically you end up in the same place, right? I mean, look at the inflation problem. That's true. That is absolutely true. But the way you solve or try and solve those issues will be different. Because if you really think somebody's pulling all the strings at the centre, then that's a very different model to say, no, actually, some of the thinking that we've got and some of the way we're doing things need to change, which I agree is probably right. And of course, the Andrew Bailey at the Bank of England made the comment, I think, quite worryingly overnight, when he was giving evidence to Parliament in the UK, that he's really concerned about inflation, food prices, and the fact that many countries, not just Western countries, but developing countries, will have huge issues because of the inflation pressures and the lack of food and things. So there are some really big issues out there. Yeah. And I guess the question is, how well are we equipped locally or globally to tackle them, not them? And it's interesting that there was a recent comment from the leader of the IMF saying we're very bad at doing multiple things at once. Right? Yeah. We all chase the COVID issue for a bit, and then we chase the Ukraine issue for a bit, and then we have to actually keep multiple balls in the air at the same time, and that seems quite difficult.
Yeah, that's right. And I think, in terms of what's at the root of this, at least for our country, Steve Keen often makes the point that we are now 82nd in the world in manufacturing capability, below, I think Zimbabwe is 81 and Gabon is 80. We, for example, we couldn't even manufacture masks when COVID came. So when you're totally dependent on importing everything and you create your so-called wealth in your country by digging holes in the ground and pumping more air into the housing bubble, then, when something interrupts your supply chain and so on, like COVID for 2 years, then, it's supply and demand and the prices go up. And we really, really need to start trying to claw back our ability to manufacture a wide range of products and become less dependent on overseas. I think. Well,
we have one of the narrowest economies in the world, right? If you look at it, we're way down the list because we don't do much other than houses and holes.
It's just frightening, and I just can't help putting in here, and I shouldn't be kicking Trent Zimmerman too much, but in one of the debates, I was making this point about how we're below Gabon in manufacturing capability, and in his response, he said, "Well, I don't really see why Victor's praising Gabon so much." I think kind of totally missed the point, but anyway.
And somebody's Scott's come in and said, and fuel security. Yeah, we have a big issue with fuel security as well because we don't have that much. Now there was one last question, which is slightly tangential but actually quite important, and that's to do with the question of bail-in. Now, I don't know whether you're across bail-in, but of course there is in the world, in various Western countries, right, there's a risk potentially of banks who get into difficulty get effectively access to deposits, which are seen as loans to the bank. So it's an interesting and important conversation. We probably don't have time to do it justice now, but it points to a broader question, and that is about the way that our financial system is regulated, the purpose of the financial system, and to what extent the financial system is actually, again, supporting society and supporting the economy versus actually supporting other things.
Yes.
Big issue.
And it is a big issue, and I guess we don't have time to talk about it in detail, and maybe I'm not even qualified to talk about it in detail, but I think both you and Steve Keen constantly make the point that, well, at least Steve makes the point, I think you agree with it when we've been on this show before, that we are, and he was making the point tonight, as a matter of fact, we are pushing everything into the financial sector. And that goes along with what we were just saying about our diminishing manufacturing capabilities. The flip side of that is that it all goes into the financial sector, and it becomes, as I think Steve called it, the multiple exchanges of money without actually producing anything.
Correct.
And then when that sector of the economy becomes the strong sector, then that's the sector that, through its donations and otherwise, has the greatest hold over government to protect it and all its shenanigans. So bailment of people's money, if they demand that, that's something they would get, and that's kind of frightening for me.
Yeah, and there's a big conversation. I'll probably do a separate show actually for those people interested on bail, and there's a few updates, and I think it's a very important conversation, particularly now with the fragility of the financial system that we've got, and the the crashing markets and the pressure on banks. But we can't really cover that in more detail here. Well, we've really come to the end of our time, Victor, but is there anything else you want to sort of highlight before we tie a bow on this conversation?
Yes, I'd like to highlight the fact that if any viewers are in the great federal seat of North Sydney, they should vote for me.
Simple and straightforward, and absolutely. And the point I want to make is that if you're in New South Wales, Steve is standing in the Senate.
And
right?
Of course. Yep. Even more importantly, Steve Keen in the Senate.
Well, I want to say thank you very much, Victor, for sparing so much of your time with us, and for being so frank and open about so many things. Hopefully it gave you a bit of a platform too to be able to actually go into some of these issues that unfortunately on the main channels you never get to.
As I said before, it's always a great privilege to come on this show, because you do ask the big questions, and I have to say it's very refreshing. I'm not sure that I always answer them adequately, but it's really refreshing to at least be given the chance to address things that really matter. So I'm very grateful, Martin. Thank you.
Well, thank you. And, I've always, as a philosopher by training, I always like to try and get below the surface and try and make some thinking about what is really going on. And, whatever happens, I wish you the very best for Saturday. But whatever happens, do come back and visit us again, and we'll talk about some of these philosophical issues more, because there's always plenty to talk about. Best of luck, and I certainly think that your paddle was something which will stay in my mind for a long, long time.
Somebody said to me today, I'm not sure quite still how to take this. They'd seen that video, and they said, well, if you only leave one good thing to the world, then your purpose on earth has been fulfilled.
Absolutely.
And the implication was that was the one good thing. But look, I'll take it.
I was going to say, take it if you can. Thank you, Victor. I'm going to take you off air now. Best of luck for the votes, and I'll be following with interest what happens.
Thanks very much.
See you.
Martin.
Take care. Bye-bye. So there we are, folks. Very interesting conversation with Victor, and great to have him on, and Steve as well. Just to say that there will be a show next week. I'm I'm going to start a series specifically relating to renting and renters and the whole question of what's going on in the rental sector. In fact, Megan Wells is coming on next week to talk with me about the renter's dilemma. I've also got Edwin lined up to talk about that as well. There's a big story that we're not exploring in Australia, the 2 million renting people who are in rental stress at the moment. That's way more than mortgage stress. And nobody's really spoken about this through the campaign, unfortunately. So to my mind, this is a really important topic. So I'll be spending some time over the next couple of weeks on that. And as I said, I'll also be making a show on the question of bail-in, deposit bail-in in particular, because I think that's another important conversation that we should be having. So with that, I want to say thank you very much for spending some of your evening with us. The good news is the doggy cam is still working. The dogs have hardly moved all evening, so there they are, still sound asleep. They actually aren't so politically engaged as they were the other day on when I did my radio interview, but there you go. They are still there. I'm going to take them out for a walk shortly. Thank you very much for spending time with us this evening. I hope you found it useful. Do like the show, please, and come back and see us next week or see some of our recorded shows. This is Martin North from Digital Finance Analytics, signing off. Have a good evening. Cheers.